CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from the command center here at the CHEK News World Headquarters in Victoria. Is our political system toxic and broken? Why is the NDP filibustering its own legislation in the House? And should we move to a 4-day work week? Just some of the questions we are going to tackle this week with our pod squad as we break everything down for you in provincial politics. Jeff, Allie, and Jillian are here as always. Thank you to you. And let us dive right into the biggest story this week by far. The resignation of former Tourism and Advanced Education Minister Melanie Mark, the first Indigenous woman cabinet minister, and she announced her departure with a blistering speech in which she equated the BC legislature to a torture chamber, said she'd suffered character assassination by her critics in an institution gripped by systemic racism and a political system in which white men made her feel like, in her own words, a dumb Indian who was blamed by the media for things she was not responsible for while her successes were ignored. A very blistering denouncement of our political system and how it made her feel and how it treats women and Indigenous people. Now, Mark's her critique is her own lived experience. We're not going to question that or discuss that here. What we are going to talk about, though, is can we change BC politics in some way to address these concerns? Premier David Eby, Liberal leader Kevin Falcon both said in response they're open to changes to make it better for everyone involved. And I think we can also acknowledge women in politics get it far worse on no matter which party. So making a safer environment, making a better BC political system. What do we do to even begin to wrap our heads around this? Jillian, we all watched the press conference. Everyone watched the press conference. Now we're trying to figure out what to do about it. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly very strong language from Melanie Mark. I think it was, brave of her to be so candid about her experience. Often, we'll get kind of resignations with people, and it's their choice to keep things more private, saying that they, need to resign for personal reasons or to spend more time with their families. And I think it was, although jarring because it's so unusual to hear such strong words about the lived experience of what it is like as a woman and even more so as an Indigenous woman in the legislature. But I think it was a wake-up call for the legislature. There is a lot that Melanie Mark said that resonated with me as someone that's worked in the legislature. I think that it is in many ways an institution that carries a lot of the sort of bad things about our past, and there are things that I think that we can be doing to change it. She talked about how she'd like to see the legislature be less partisan, how she'd like to see it be less polarized. And I think that there's lots of reforms that the government could look at to, foster more collaboration, foster more better, productive working relationships between people of different parties. Things like, allowing for debate on private members' bills, allowing for MLAs from different parties to work together more substantively on issues through using committees more effectively. Those types of things are not going to, solve all of the problems that Melanie Mark outlined. I think a lot of it is societal, and it's not just politics where, we see racism and we see workplaces being more hostile towards women. In that regard, I think, the most important thing is leadership from the parties and how they conduct themselves and how they, sort of show leadership to their supporters and to their staff. But yeah, I think I hope that the leaders in the legislature are true to their word, that they will take this seriously and look at reforms that can make the legislature more of a welcoming place, because it's always unfortunate to hear this kind of thing. And I think it adds to the barriers and the reticence that we see from women and from people of color to entering politics, because it is such a challenging arena.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to recruit good candidates, young candidates, people of diverse backgrounds, and women and minority candidates, because they look at the political system and the amount of grief you take and the toxicity and go, why would I want to be involved in that? Allie, any sort of ideas come to mind on what we can do here? And I think we need all parties to agree on whatever it is, some type of collaborative spirit here to move forward, you'd think. But what do you think?
So as someone who spends a lot of time advocating for more women to get involved in the political process, I truly respect what Mark did in the legislature this week. It wasn't easy, and you could obviously tell she was coming from a place of extreme emotion during her speech during the legislative part. But then it was also very interesting to see how happy she was in the media scrum afterwards, like this weight had been lifted off of her shoulders. When it comes to what we can do and where do we go from here, certainly Jillian mentioned all of those things that Mark mentioned, more collaboration, things like that. Those are very obvious. But what I think and what I hope Mark does are specific examples of where this toxicity was coming from. Specific solutions come from just calling it out. And I think, but by no means is it the exact same as what Jody Wilson-Raybould experienced federally with the Federal Liberal Party. But there are some overlaps here in that when Wilson-Raybould did this, she had very specific examples of how we can make things better. And I'm really hoping that Mark does the same, because when we talk about, how do we get more people involved in the political process, more women involved, more people of color, other matriarchs, like Mark had mentioned, Indigenous women to express that call to service as an elected representative. We as British Columbians, we see the legislature as this shiny building that everything runs very smoothly, but we don't know exactly what happens. And I think there's an opportunity here for Mark to just really call it out, and for her to share the story of what actually happens behind those closed doors in a way that we potentially have never seen before. So if this is her next call to action, I'm quite pleased that she's the one leading the charge on it.
She did mention writing a book at one point. So it's possible, much like Jody Wilson-Raybould, we'll get some more specific examples that way. Jeff, what did you think of this?
Yeah, I don't think it's up to Melanie Mark to tell us what the solutions are. I think it's up to the rest of us to heed the wake-up call and do better. I don't think that the solution is about changing how we vote or setting up another cross-party committee. It's about the people in Victoria, every MLA and every party, and making a personal choice and commitment to be better. Because what we get in Victoria right now is a ridiculously adversarial, confrontational, and bitterly personal culture. We spend an hour of every workday devoted to people ripping into each other and calling them names in a ridiculous pursuit for advantage and power. And what does this say to someone like Melanie Mark, who we need more of? We need more Ellis Rosses. We need more Adam Olsons, and not fewer. And we're a step back now. What does this culture say to those folks? It says, if life has beat you up, then this isn't the place for you. You think of Melanie Mark's background, downtown East Side, really difficult childhood, intergenerational trauma from a family affected by residential schools. And we saw the Alberni Indian Residential School, the news out of there this week of 67 kids buried in graves, and what that means for that generation, the generations to come. And you spend all this time clawing your way back, and you're on a mission to make things better for people. And then you get to the institution, and it's just more of the same abuse that you've been facing the whole time, because the place is not about solutions. It's not about people working together to advance communities. It's about people tearing down each other for gain. And so we can talk about, let's come up with specific ways that we can work together. Maybe it's just about people, like stopping it. Just stop being idiots. Start treating each other with humanity and kindness, and focus on solutions instead of tearing down each other. It's not good for anyone involved. And if we want to have those voices of folks who we need in the legislature, talking about these issues, sharing their lived experience so we can have better policy. All of us need to do better.
It strikes me that the MLAs are just the tip of what is a toxic iceberg. And I know I come from a media perspective, and so I have that bias. But a lot of the hostility in the legislature stems from the fact that some of the greatest political minds of our generation are dedicated primarily to the task of lying to us through omission. That government doesn't answer questions. This party, the last party, the next party, 10 parties from now, 5 parties back, because they don't want to answer questions. And so you have this sort of immense frustration that builds from MLAs who begin to throw haymakers at each other, call each other names. We can't get simple answers about, hey, about that bridge in my riding. How much is this going to cost? What's the plan over here? Just spin and garbage and baffle gab, and it creates a kind of more confrontational environment. So I think if we're going to move to solutions, we're going to have to also move to a little bit more transparency in our accountability. And I realize as a journalist that's my bias, but you watch so many MLAs come into the building and get either through the Premier's office or the Leader's office or whoever's office brought into line on what they can say and how they can work and what they can do and how honest they can be. And very smart people stand up and read very stupid things written by very unelected people. And the whole system just kind of clogs up with dishonesty, I guess. And the MLAs, it becomes very personal. And then the other thing I just want to throw out there, are we now in a period of sort of, electing people by the personality of their leaders, the bus with the face on the side, the brand of a single person, and then does politics become about tearing that person down in order to get your votes, whoever that party leader may be? Let's go around and anyone can jump in first on that. Jeff, we were talking to you, so why don't we just stay with you?
Yeah.
Do those points make any sense to you?
Those points make a lot of sense to me, Rob, and they're totally fair game, and they speak to what I was talking about. I'm not pointing fingers at any one body in the legislature. I'm talking about all of the parties, about the entire institution, about the way that we do things, about how it's about everything that you talked about. And you get these ridiculous visuals of MLAs doing photo ops with kids in pink shirts on anti-bullying to say, oh, we're against bullying. And then they go into question period and all the MLAs and all the parties start to behave like bullies to one another and nothing changes. So it's, there's lots that needs to change, and it's on everyone in every party at all parts of government to change, because we're hearing from the voices, the very people we want at the center of politics and decision making, saying, forget about this. This is awful, and I can't do it anymore.
And the media, to throw us in, Jillian and Allie, we'll bring you in on this too, but the media has a role to play too, and I will agree that we don't cover politics in the best way possible. The more we lock things down, the more our glimpse into whether a minister is competent and good at their job or on top of their file or accepting solutions is 30 minutes in question period, because we have no idea how they're making decisions. We can't talk to any of their people. And then you start covering the performative aspect of politics. And I've heard from so many ministers recently that they know what they need to say. They know the answer to the question, but the format that they're forced to participate in through question period or scrums or cameras in their face, personally, due to their own life experience and traumas, and they can't express it that way. And so as the media, we're going to have to find a better and different way of toning things down and talking about different ways of success and accomplishment that aren't performative, I think, as well. Allie, all of that, plus the leadership, plus, the honesty issue, how do we wrestle with those?
Well, we're on the right track, right? If the spark of the conversation was to call it out, here we are, all of us calling it out. But let's get back to Mark's point, where how are women treated in the legislature differently from men? I think where media and us pundits and just as observers can really start to action some of this is listen to the attacks across the floor for against women. It's always about the personality. It's always about like her tone of voice, perhaps. It's always about these like personal things. But then if it's an attack on a male counterpart, it's on policy. And it drives me nuts. Like, we can debate on policy too, but yet here women are, and I'm observing them defend things in their personal life versus the bill at hand. And it happens every single time. And elections are even worse because it's never the question on the policy or their ideas. It's always on a personal issue. Like, I remember Christy Clark getting attacked for her haircut or what she was wearing. And it wasn't just her, it's all women in the legislature. And so if we really want equality, attack us on our brains here, not on anything external.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think like having worked for a female leader, it's almost like, it brings back a lot of the stuff that, you hear from stakeholders. I remember when I was negotiating the debate in 2020, the leaders debate, when Sonia Furstenau was leader, I had, a representative from another party try to cajole me into getting on his side to get rid of the podiums because he said that, she would look too small on the debate stage because he thought, it would benefit his leader. I've heard, whisper campaigns that are, very much character attacks. And I think that a lot of that comes from staff and in the legislature. And I think it's really hard to kind of root that out because you're kind of, as staff, put into this arena where it's so competitive, where we have this sort of like zero-sum politics, where your job and your future is on the line if you don't do everything you can to champion your party and position them best come election time. I think on the positive side, having had the experience of working in the minority government, I saw some glimmers of how that could be different, like how relationships and more kind of interpersonal interaction between staff can enable people to look at each other more like human beings. And, when we go back into a majority government, there's very little, if any, opportunity for that kind of a thing. And so I really do think that looking at how the work in the legislature is structured and how parties work together and how staff work together really can make a difference, because at the end of the day, it's people bearing the brunt of the abuse, but it's also people perpetrating it. And I think really digging into what is facilitating that, what is driving people to dehumanize each other and treat each other this way is really at the core of it.
Can I just build on that? Because I think it's a really good and important point. Allie made really good and important points too, and I agree. And if I ever hear that you're just being difficult and emotional. If I ever hear that one more time, my head's going to explode. And I say that not as the person hearing it. So it's gross, the things that are said to women in politics and all in positions of leadership everywhere. But maybe the time has come to take a look at let's get everyone to go to this place in Victoria for weeks on end and cluster into this tight, highly concentrated community where everyone's away from their families, they're away from their communities, they're away from their support networks. And maybe we don't want to do that anymore. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of remote work. We had people away from the cauldron of Victoria. My dad was a provincial legislator in Ontario, and he would go away for weeks, and it sucked for him, and it sucked for my mom, and it sucked for us as kids. We didn't ever see our dad, and it wasn't healthy and good, and people did things that were, people drink a lot, and they canoodle a lot, and good things don't happen. Maybe we need to look at that and do some things that takes the pressure off of Victoria, that gives people, a better chance to live balanced, healthy lives and be better people in politics. And I'm certain we would get a better, more diverse group of people involved if we tried something like that.
It's a fascinating idea. I hadn't thought of the actual sort of structure of the legislature, the location of the legislature, the physicality, but you're right. It's very much a dorm room sort of like college mentality of all these people leave
There you go.
congregate. And but just to stay with this again, and I realize this is basically, if you're watching us on TV, the entire show, but it's such an interesting and fascinating issue. What do we do next? Because there are two problems here. There's the hypocrisy issue, which is the feeling like you can very easily stop talking about this because you'll start to say things like, well, I remember when the NDP made Stephanie Cadieux cry in question period by accusing her of killing children as the children's minister. And then you stop talking about reforms because some of the MLAs who are virtue signaling now about this issue in the NDP caucus were some of the worst in opposition. But we can't get tied down in the hypocrisy. We have to come up with a solution that moves beyond that doesn't benefit any one party, including the party in power, and moves us forward. So how? Are we talking like citizens' assembly? Are we talking like the leaders of the parties? Are we talking an all-party legislative committee? Like functionally, how do you think we do it? And there's probably no answer, but Allie, like it strikes me that it's really the kind of thing you're going to need to get the leaders in a room together, which they almost never do, to move, right?
Yes, and perhaps even an independent assessment of it all as well, right? I think political parties, by nature of trying to protect themselves, may not be as honest or forthcoming into what needs to be done and what the issues are, and that's just politics too, right? As each party tries to kind of hide some of those things if it benefits more success down the election road. No one wants to say that, but it's true. I think another piece that was very interesting from Mark's remarks this week. Did you catch that she said that her replacement in the by-election for Mount Pleasant needs to be an Indigenous woman? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was brilliant. Whether that was discussed before or not, who knows? But what she's saying here is that you will not replace me with a pale male and stale. You will not replace me with the voice that's trying to oppress me. And I thought, wow, if there was a mic drop politically, she is holding the NDP accountable to the candidate that replaces her.
We had planned to talk about other topics on the TV portion of this, but make sure you subscribe to the podcast because we are going to talk about other things, the 4-day work week, Surrey policing. We've got management of the legislature on bills. Thank you to the panel. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest here on Political Capital.